Okay. We wait for 2 more minutes. Then we start. Good. Maybe we start. The meeting will be recorded, so you'll have the opportunity to share it with others later. We had about 60 registrations. I think not all of us have managed to join right now. Maybe some more will join as we go. I'm very happy to be able to open the webinar. First, let me start with a very few ground rules. Please put yourself on silent mode. Please do not put any video except for you are speaking and you are in the process of speaking. We'll have a break from 10:55 to 11:05. Time might change a little bit here and there. Yeah, I'm excited to have this webinar on facilitating knowledge exchange on agri-finance. What can we learn from each other? What can MENA and the Sub-Saharan Africa region learn from each other? I think this learning is becoming more and more important. There's a lot of valuable experience being gathered in the world. We also see that networking is important to address the current challenges, some of which are also linked to networks itself, as we see with the recent pandemic and also the war in Ukraine, a country that together with Russia has a lot of agricultural activities and is important for food production. Yeah, and this webinar will try to address some of the challenges by sharing experience. Maybe we can prepare the presentation. Could you share it, please? Yeah, thanks a lot. Let's go to the next slide. Yeah, so as you know, we have scheduled a keynote presentation from Tim Strong. I'll introduce the speakers later as the respective session starts. We'll have question and answer sessions after each of the presentations. We'll have a presentation on a case study in agricultural asset finance in Kenya. We'll have a case study from Sub-Saharan Africa, where farmers receive loans via cooperatives with a heavy digitalized lending technology using scorecards and using a highly innovative approach. And then we have a panel discussion with Tim Strong, David Nero, Bram Van Der Bosch, Mohamed Al-Dakia, and Chris Tatum. I'll introduce all of our colleagues and panelists and speakers as they will speak. If you have any questions, please post them in the chat function at any time. And after each presentation, we'll read them out and ask the speakers or the panelists to address them. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Yes, the session, the webinar is managed by LFS. LFS is a consulting company based in Berlin. We have more than almost 25 years experience in MSME finance, in agricultural finance. And we have seen how everything has evolved. We have started with individual lending to MSMEs, and now we've started going into digital finance. We have a very broad spectrum of experience in the MSME world, in sub-Saharan Africa, and also in the in the MENA region. We have built up microfinance banks from inception, more than 10 of them, and have been managing them. So our spectrum of services is quite broad. Please go to the next slide. We do consultancies in MSME finance, in agricultural finance, in digital finance, in green finance. Go to the next slide, please. Yes, in IT, especially core banking software, in risk management, and environmental and social topics that become more and more important, and in strategic finance. The webinar is sponsored by the SANAD TA facility, technical assistance facility, and I would like to invite Katharina Morton to present a bit of TA facility.
Thank you very much, Matthias. So I am just going to share my presentation. Please let me know if you can see it.
Yes, we can see it.
Good. So from the SANAD Technical Assistance Facility, I would like to welcome all of you to this webinar. Agricultural finance is an important topic for us, for the TA facility, and we are very happy to see all of you attend this webinar today. The SANAD fund is an MSME fund, the fund that finances micro, small, and medium enterprises in the Middle East and sub-Saharan Africa, and fosters economic development and job creation in the region. The technical assistance facility that sponsors this webinar today provides tailored support to our partners on the ground in these countries, and also supports the development of the entrepreneurial ecosystem in general. So supporting entrepreneurship, development of agri-finance, fostering and building the capacity of the financial sector. The map shows the regions where the fund and the TA facility are active. So as I mentioned, we work in the Middle East and North Africa, but also expanded 2 years ago to West Africa and East Africa. And we have our regional offices in Egypt, Lebanon, and Kenya. The fund was initiated back in 2011 by the German development bank, KfW. It's advised by Finance in Motion, and it's a public-private partnership, so you can see all the investors outlined or mentioned here on the slide. On the TA facility side, since 2011, we've already ran over 300 TA projects to the benefit of our partner institutions. The sector was a budget of over almost $22 million, and we focus on a number of topics. We call them focal topics for the TA facility, and agricultural finance is one of those. On the agricultural finance, we do quite a lot. We provide support to our partner institutions to basically promote knowledge sharing and raising awareness on various innovative approaches and models in agricultural finance. We provide tailored support to help them develop strategies, develop products tailored to their needs on agri-finance. We do work on value chain financing. On the sector level, we cooperate with sector institutions where with the goal to reinforce the infrastructure to facilitate agricultural lending. So an example here could be our project with the Credit Bureau in Egypt, where we are developing the credit risk assessment system for agricultural credit risk assessment system for the financial sector. And we also do sector events to promote knowledge sharing among the regions on agri-finance, similar to what we are doing here today. And the final pillar of our activities covers support of innovations. We run also entrepreneurship programs to support AgTechs through our Entrepreneurship Academy. So that's in brief about our activities. I would like to stop here and hope that this webinar will be beneficial to those who attend and participate, and very much look forward to fruitful discussions today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Katarina. Then let me start introducing Timothy Strong, who is our keynote speaker, who will talk about Agrifinance Knowledge Exchange. Timothy Strong serves as the head of Agricultural Finance for Opportunity International, which you might have heard of. He has managed diverse portfolio of agricultural finance products and services in Africa, and he has spearheaded Opportunity's efforts around implementing and mainstreaming gender-inclusive services to empower women in farming. He has long opportunity also outside the opportunity, long experience also outside of Opportunity. Has worked in Silicon Valley startups, coordinating lean and Kaizen project management, and others in the US. Tim, I would like to invite you now to share your presentation.
Thank you, Matthias. So I think Matthias and Katarina started off this webinar on the right footing. Ultimately, at the end of the day, we continue to live in unprecedented times in this modern era, and there's no doubt about it. With this month marking 2 years within a global pandemic, this is an operating environment that few of us have experience with. In mid-2020, I was on a panel presentation on agribusiness investments, and we were asked the question, if you had a magic wand, what global issue would you resolve to further agri-finance investments? Now, answers varied and were spot on, ranging the gamut from increasing access to education for young women, to the rapid expansion of nutrient-dense crop varieties, to the worldwide adoption of water-conserving irrigation technology. But at that early stage of the pandemic, I had to take a step back to answer that my magic wand would wave away the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. Little did I know at that point that we would still be where we are 2 years later. Specifically, this is based on the ongoing outside of the ongoing public health effects, as we are all aware, but the pandemic has also had and continues to have a very severe economic impact. For both individual and emergent farmers and MSME agribusiness clients, we saw significant spikes in NPLs and PAR 30 values during the start of the pandemic, growing as high as 36 and 29% respectively. Financial services to those two segments decreased month on month, and all of our core work had to quickly pivot away from the traditional growth mandate to focusing on shoring up business operations and ensuring that we do our utmost to ensure that clients keep their businesses open. So what we know at the client level, women are affected during this pandemic, full stop. We're incorporating COVID-19 research into high rigor client impacts surveys, noting in some markets, 80% of clients are reporting decreases in income, 60% seeing increase in household expenses, and significant business disruptions where 13% of clients had to sell assets to cope. But I think we're now looking at a stage where, with regards to the significant changes in global oil prices, and this is very much to some of the military tension happening in Europe, we're seeing transport differentials going through the roof, and in fertilizer and input prices literally doubling from prices last year. But despite these statistics, many bankers that I speak with have begun referring to their agri-finance portfolios as pandemic proof, stating that despite the significant challenges, these books have performed better on average than more traditional products, noting that despite everything else, people still need to eat, so agriculture continues. And our books have shown the same results. From our entry-level products, group financing for smallholder farmers, there's been limited direct economic impact as global and regional food prices have also increased. And national governments have been extremely quick to enact policies that focus on agricultural production as a critical service. And we see the results within our portfolio really indicating that producers have had a very good couple of years with high levels of yield, good market prices, although of course our teams have been working to ensure that both inputs and loans are continuing to get the last mile. Overall, smallholder production lending over the past year now represents over 90% of our portfolio by volume and 52% of the portfolio by value. And current smallholder group risk exposure remains the lowest of all categories with a PAR 30 of 4.2%, compared to 6.8% at the end of April 2019. But with this kind of opening comment from my side, what I've been mulling over lately on Zoom calls, in breakfast meetings, in boardrooms, when the term pandemic proof is mentioned, is that perhaps the current results are not necessarily a reflection on the importance of food production and of agriculture globally, but more of a reflection on the intense level of resilience that agriculturalists display every day, regardless of a global health pandemic and an economic downturn. Can we move to the next slide, please? So it is my pleasure today to be invited by LFS and SANAD in today's keynote presentation, which we've entitled Cultivating Credit, Best Practices, Challenges, and Opportunities. For this Agri-Finance Knowledge Exchange, I'm joining this webinar from my base in Lilongwe, Malawi, where I serve as the head of Global Ag Finance Portfolio for an organization that has been in operations for over 50 years and reached 19.4 million clients. We operate through 104 different partners in 30 countries and have facilitated a lending book worth $2.3 billion US dollars. But specifically within agri-finance, it's really this sense of bringing together market actors and mutually beneficial relationships centered around access to finance. By facilitating capital and technical assistance, farmers can purchase high quality fertilizers, learn improved agricultural techniques, and connect with markets, all of which leads to, at the end of the day, improved production, productivity, and profitability. With each country of operations, we partner with local financial institutions, key market actors such as major off-takers, and local stakeholders to strengthen rural markets. Really looking at models to address two fundamental needs for rural clients: access to financial services and access to agricultural networks. As we go through the 6 agenda items listed here, I'd like to request that we all ultimately bear our agri-finance clients in mind. At times, I personally have the tendency to move too quickly to the numbers. And I understand how easy it is to lose sight of the why when we drill into the how. With that point to the comment made earlier about the resilience of agri-finance clients and those of us in this room that have the privilege of serving them, what strikes me the most about an agricultural life is that it's inherently a life of faith. Despite the level of agri-tech, soil science, and business development planning that we deploy, all of our work is based on a constant belief that life will improve despite seemingly insurmountable hurdles. And really imagining that your hopes and dreams for the future, universal dreams, like seeing your children educated, knowing that the next meal you cook for your family will be enough to go around, and building your own house and owning land, that these dreams can ultimately be pinned by your faith that a bag of seed will sprout when planted in the ground, and over 4 months grow into a mature plant that produces enough for you to save, and excess for you to sell, and make enough money for your needs throughout an entire year. As financiers, we do the exact same with our credit approval appraisal processes. Really a belief that every loan will come back to the institution and generate yield on portfolio. But the faith and trust that farmers must have in the quality of that seed is tremendous. Beyond the basic miracle of germination, there are numerous events throughout a growing season that can threaten that belief, from floods, droughts, pest and disease, desert locusts, fall armyworms, cyclones. Beyond that, there's even man-made factors that threaten a farmer's faith. She must believe that if she invests enough to produce more than she will need to eat, then she will be able to find a market to sell her crops, and that prices will be fair. And with a single paycheck per year, in many cases, the faith that this will be enough is a faith that it will cover the expenses for the rest of the year. Can we move to the next slide, please? Ultimately, we found that investing in agriculture is one of the most powerful actions we can take for a more inclusive future. More opportunities in agriculture mean that fewer people go hungry, fewer children miss school, and more rural families are able to build sustainable livelihoods. So, assuming that we want to go into the business of financing agriculture, we know where we want to go and we know who we want to serve, but the reason that portfolios exist is centered on the key fact that many pre-commercial farmers still only produce at 20 to 30% of their potential yields. A favorite quote of mine resonates here: prosperous farmers make for a prosperous nation, and when farmers are in trouble, the nation is in trouble. From the perspective of recent political economy analyses, we know that farmers still make up the majority of the voting bloc in sub-Saharan Africa, North Africa, and the Middle East. More to the point, this chronic underproduction becomes globally significant as we compare this to the fact that global food production will need to double by 2050 to meet rising demand, which, if not met, will result in exponential increases in food and fiber costs around the world, making industrial profitability decrease as workers' wages will need to match the associated cost, increases in cost of living. Unfortunately, current market assessments also indicate that only 3% of agricultural finance demand is currently met. For us, this is both a significant problem, but also a very significant business and market opportunity. With an estimated $2 to $3 trillion gap on the continent per year, the business case is quite clear to engage with this client base. However, traditional business models must pivot. It's a direct result of this gap and acknowledge that a single firm cannot make a meaningful difference by doing this work in a silo. The financial sectors across the Middle East, North Africa, and Sub-Saharan Africa have evolved significantly over the past 2 decades, much to the credit of the hard work of many of yourselves. And in many ways, this is an acknowledgement that building parallel and redundant systems are less effective than approaches in integrating across existing partners. On the next slide, assuming that the why in our business case is clear, the much harder questions revolve around the how. We are all global citizens of this world, and we have inherent interests in seeing our communities and our nations improve. But many of us are also daunted by the scale of the problems facing our world and can honestly ask ourselves, isn't this the job of governments and international organizations? So take, for example, on the screen here, the Global Sustainable Development Goals. Certainly their responsibility, no? But based on the United Nations' own internal reviews and publications, I've taken the liberty of organizing a small infographic on the PowerPoint here. Annually, we've also noted that only a third of the capital estimated need to reach these goals is actually being met by sovereign investment. Furthermore, when we zoom out and look at the available public investment capacity compared to the private investment capacity, the public funds are represented by only the incredibly small blue square in the lower right-hand corner. So ultimately, the might and the strength of the private sector specifically of commercial, retail, and finance institutions has the capacity to literally change the world. But problematically, financiers are also quite limited, as at the end of the day, we are stewards of other people's money. So what are some of the key questions we must be prepared to ask ourselves in the agri-finance sector? Because I can guarantee if we don't ask ourselves, I'm fairly sure our risk departments will also be asking us. Principally is addressing and acknowledging the risk-return gap specific to agri-finance. A common question that originates from the finance and treasury departments of most financial institutions. Why should we put funds into such a risky category when a branch officer can make 4 to 6% more by underwriting a non-agri client? And this is a critical question, as those who invest into financial institutions tend to have some of the highest return expectations at the end of the day. Ultimately, profit being the scarcest resource for all of our businesses. So beyond the straightforward business questions, to my earlier point on the ongoing political economy analyses, due to the national and regional importance of agriculture, it also tends to be an incredibly distorted market with ongoing issues of crop-specific and general trade policy harmonization, lack of transparent certification regimes for both input and final value addition products, fraud, and to me, the scariest, significant levels of direct to farmer subsidies. Really a tried and true tool in the tool belts of many of our politicians around the world is to support the agricultural voting base with seed, input, and market price subsidies. On the front end, this can be viewed as extremely beneficial and market investment opportunity. But in many cases, this market distortion significantly over-leverages input suppliers, pushing many to the edge of bankruptcy as delayed government payments push firm liquidity to the brink. Scarier, though, is the misalignment of subsidies, which can in effect take the highest quality seed available within a market, unfortunately sending this to many of the lowest performing farmers, many of whom prefer to wash the seed and consume it as a grain, creating a very significant market gap between input supply and input demand, opening up space for both counterfeit inputs and a thriving black market. But my third question is really zooming out to the 10,000-foot perspective of the economist. One of my favorite questions is a dollar ever truly left on the floor? And it's a tough question. The human species has been practicing both agriculture and finance for so many millennia, then there must be an obvious explanation for why there is this ongoing market gap in agri-finance. Ultimately, farmers and agri-finance are just not profitable. So moving to the next slide, we, as an organization, have the opportunity to perform financial analyses on many books. Now, I'd like to raise a specific portfolio as a case study in response to the previous 3 questions that I just raised. And in this specific case in West Africa, we did find quite a significant timeline before meaningful yield to portfolio was achieved. Ultimately, this mature 12-year-old agri-finance book took 7 years before achieving profit after tax. Upfront investments were required in terms of building up staff capacity, infrastructure, and credit policies, as well as mobilizing client awareness and credit readiness. However, over the past 5 years, we did see this book become a major contributor to the overall position of the financial institution and ultimately become a very meaningful use of bank equity. Year-on-year growth has proven meaningful, and today, this agri-finance book demonstrates a significant investment opportunity and ultimately yields material profits to clients. So recent statistically significant client level assessments noted a 57% increase in farmer level yield and a 64% increase in income. The financial institutions also deliver return to investors, noting that agri-finance now represents over 22% of this particular institution's growth loan portfolio. Johannes, moving to the next slide. This is the crux of our discussion today. 7 years is a very long time to wait for a potential return on investment for any investor, let alone for those of us in retail and commercial finance. So side note, this ROI position also looks strikingly similar to me when mapped against bank investments in digital technology. But the key to this entire learning exchange is the question here. What mechanisms exist to make agri-finance portfolios profitable and on a much faster timeline? And from my vantage, the short answer can be categorized in 3 words: strategy, partnerships, and innovations. So moving to the next slide on strategy. We must take a step back and remember that financial institutions represent an incredibly non-homogeneous set of capabilities, capacities, and operate in distinct environments. This is why I love knowledge exchanges like this one. One size does not fit all, and we must be adaptive in our planning based on both our limitations as well as our opportunities and our capacities. But 4 major themes do present themselves. From an analysis my team conducted on over 300 different financial institutions across 5 different markets, we found that these 4 major themes are critical when deploying an agri-finance strategy. First, targeting. Every financier must ask themselves in terms of what client base they desire to target within the agri-finance sector. Just like financial institutions, farmers and agribusinesses are an incredibly non-homogeneous group, and their financing requirements vary widely. Client targeting will inform specifically what geographies to be considered for the book, but these will also need to be based on each firm's capacity. We know that there's a key difference in rural finance compared to traditional financial products, where a critical mass for profitability philosophy does not hold true. So what I mean by that is that the lowest hanging fruit is harvested when it comes to client acquisition, harvested first when it comes to client acquisition. So the best and the easiest to reach clients are served first. And from there, the operating costs actually increase to scale and expand a portfolio. Every new client actually becomes more expensive to serve. So your strategy must take this into account, balancing it against your specific institution investments and the appetite and backstop against your current cost to income ratios. So what agri-finance clients can you actually afford to serve? Secondly, this points directly to the evolution of your growth versus risk management appetite. Every banker I've ever worked with has shared a common objective: to grow and maintain the health of their book. But the KPIs assigned by senior management must also be well aligned with each financial institution's capacity at the end of the day. Blanket statements like 1 million rural clients over the next 3 years can be incredibly risky if the portfolio growth trajectory does not match the capital adequacy or operational ability of the firm. Beyond this, all products as well as deposits must grow on equal footing with a well-managed agricultural book. Good governance of a bank rarely allows any product line to exceed 20 to 25% of the total gross loan portfolio, even for specialist firms. Third, information asymmetry has proven to be the Achilles heel for many emergent portfolios. And these asymmetries can be critical between the supply and demand side of financial services, so financiers and clients, but can also prove to be the downfall of a portfolio when they exist internally within a firm. Discrepancies between who knows what can throttle business growth on the supply side of financial provision, creating siloed operations, unmanageable credit approval turnaround time, and unreconcilable tension between sales teams and credit committees. Ensuring mechanisms for knowledge sharing within an institution is critical, especially in terms of client knowledge and product knowledge. And on the demand side of the equation, one of the most significant barriers to product uptake is that new client funnels are very narrow. Farmers and agribusinesses alike report extremely limited knowledge on available financial products, how to access them, and how to use them. So strong strategy within agri-finance must include mechanisms to get the word out and to support pre-investment business development services. Credit readiness is key. And excitingly, this also presents a very real opportunity for financiers. Financial services at their core are ultimately a relationship business. Ultimately, every mechanism put into place to support the credit readiness of prospective clients also serves to strengthen the relationship between your operations and the end client. So strategies must take this into consideration. To Hassam's question, let me do one quick point and then can talk through the capital adequacy and the cost to income ratios charts on the right. A recent report from Jordan also noted these same limitations, with the excuse me, second most prevalent gap in small farmer profitability being based on a lack of awareness of different financial products, most notably of digital products, to enable them to access relevant payment and saving services. This led directly to the overutilization of the wrong financial products, creating a cycle of over-indebtedness. On the supply side, there was also an acknowledgement by many Jordanese financial products were not well positioned to meet farmers' needs. So a key targeted approach to resolve this issue was to directly develop tailored credit products to match repayments with the cash flows of the agricultural sector, and to directly engage value chain partners, utilizing existing informal credit arrangements with input suppliers and traders as an entry point for formal financiers. On the right-hand side of the PowerPoint is a mapping of a number of different financial institutions' agricultural loan portfolios versus their cost to income ratios. Segmenting your strategy and your approach really needs to take into consideration the capacity of your financial institution, really noting that Agrifinance in particular can be a very heavy contributor to cost to income ratios, ultimately making sure you have the capacity to serve rural clients can be expensive. On the other side, the lower chart, portfolio growth trajectories versus capital adequacy. This is from one country and one market in East Africa, looking at variable bank by bank portfolio growth trajectories for their agri-finance portfolios and what their strategic planning overlaid against their capital adequacy. And unfortunately, many of those don't match. So really looking at the variable capacities of financial institutions and then comparing their growth trajectory strategy against what they can actually afford to do. My final point on this slide, and I'll be brief on the fourth point. Every institution and fund must take the time to evaluate in their strategy the treasury and opportunity cost of every product. Does agri-finance represent a cash cow, an emergent area, a risky endeavor? So a striking conversation I keep hearing throughout this pandemic and in many boardrooms these days is a sentiment that urban financing is demonstrating limited growth opportunities. Competition has increased to serve the same limited pool of mature urban clients, and their business growth will have to target peri-urban and rural enterprises. Of course, this is music to my ears, working in the agri-finance sector, but operating environment is important in prospective profitability analysis. So take, for example, the Kenyan Central Bank interest rate cap, which was repealed at the end of 2019. Funds cannot have non-performing assets, but weighing the prospective returns must make sense against operating costs. And there are circumstances where investing in bonds just makes more business sense than pushing financing into the field. So moving to the next slide, ultimately, where the proverbial rubber hits the road at the branch and outlet is at the branch and outlet level, where sales, credit officers, and frontline staff engage with prospective and current agri-finance clients. And this represents a major opportunity to build institutional capacity in collecting consumer insights, not just at the head office and not just through business intelligence units, but throughout an entire firm. Capturing client needs specific to agricultural seasonality, mapping both lending and repayment schedules against variable value chain timelines, and then deploying well-suited origination processes to meet client demands, and then deploying the right financial products and marketing collateral all start with directly understanding the specifically targeted agri-client and their needs. Luckily, we also know that agriculture exists within ecosystems. So regardless of how structured or unstructured any value chain is on its face value, partnerships within agri-finance present an enormous opportunity to better capture and articulate the varying customer segments and the financial needs across the value chain. Partnerships are the origination of seasonally mapped full repayment schemes. They also expand the ability for a financier to quickly adapt to realities on the ground. So take, for example, a government-owned financial institution in Southern Africa that began their agri-finance portfolio with dairy cooperatives in 2013. Throughout their first year of portfolio operations, they experienced very stable pilot rollout in Agrifinance. And then during years 2 and 3, the bank drove for scale, utilizing their relationship with the government regulated cooperative structures to expand the book over 60% year on year. But then something really interesting happened in the 4th year. Halfway into the year, their portfolio quickly started deteriorating and significant write-offs had to be undertaken. As a result, the board of the financial institution killed the entire agri-finance portfolio and transitioned into a post-mortem phase to better understand what went wrong. The key finding? The major issue with the portfolio was that the only point of contact between the bank and the right relationships and communication platforms, particularly now digital platforms, had been put into place across the value chain, this could have been completely prevented. So 2 points on that. First, rural economies are systems where different actors work at different capacities. Second, a strong belief that a rising tide will lift all ships. By concurrently strengthening the different agricultural value chain agents and establishing the connections between them, that we start to see significant economic improvement. Ultimately, demonstrating the intrinsic importance of pairing the increase of local capital with the overall improvement of agricultural systems, with the end goal of increasing agricultural output, income, and employment. Johannes, can I go to the next slide, please? So beyond the themes of strategy and partnership development, agri-finance is an incredibly exciting sector for innovation. There are new and emerging themes to take advantage of, and here's a short list of what excites me the most at the moment. So cross-cutting themes have become the buzzword of the day, specifically around digitization, climate, gender, and youth. So looking at the role of digitization. So for a firm, you need to make sure that you're segmenting between operational efficiency and client acquisition. Financiers must decide if they want to use digital tools as a product or a channel, and be prepared to adjust their business cases to match the use case. For digitization and new client support, enormous advances are happening by agri-fintechs around the globe using technology to provide both pre-investment and post-investment client support. This is particularly important as we note the direct correlation between investee distance and risk exposure within a portfolio. And the unit economics of serving rural clients have really evolved over the last decade. We've found that firms can now deliver many of the same services at an even cheaper price through mobile phones, looking at embedded last mile farmer agents now directly supporting fellow farmers with standardized messaging through the use of smartphones. And incremental costs per client trends have decreased down over the past 8 years from $52 per farmer per year to $20 to $15. And now we're finding it's possible to reach farmers at $12 each per year, and many firms aiming to achieve a target of $4 per farmer per year. Speaking to gender, climate, and youth. This is really a topic on risk and growth for financial service providers, with gender parity being an absolutely critical point. Currently, women represent roughly 55 to 60% of the agricultural workforce. And given the cultural dynamics within rural households, it's been a very long journey for many agricultural finance portfolios. But just as was stated before regarding farmers and financiers in general, women are an incredibly non-homogeneous market group. So financiers must be smart in their product segmentation and not just designed for women as a blanket group, but across different subsets of women's individual needs. On climate and risk exposure, climate and rainfall variability is at an all-time high, with many low-income farmers being pushed to cultivate increasingly marginal lands and lower soil fertility and reduced farm resilience. So this year, a team run by the Glasgow Caledonia University of Scotland presented at COP26 the COP26 convening of research conducted by financial institutions in East Africa on the specific risk exposure associated to portfolios based on the effects of climate change. I won't share the details throughout this webinar as it will be published later this month, but in short, we can do a lot of risk adjustments in financial institutions for a number of issues like market and pricing risk and agri-finance production risk, internal operational risk. But the space for climate risk adjusted financial products is one of the most exciting and extremely relevant financial innovations coming out at the moment. And this represents an enormous opportunity for sub-Saharan Africa financiers to learn directly from the Middle East and North Africa region. In 2/3 of the MENA region, less than 5% of land is arable, making MENA the most water-stressed region in the world. And yet, despite this barrier to entry, in countries like Morocco, agriculture still represents 12% of GDP and 33% of employment. Similar statistics apply in countries like Yemen, where 28% of employment originates from agricultural activities. And much of this can be directly accredited to the brilliant utilization of water harvesting, old world agri-tech, and new innovations since the Green Revolution with Internet of Things powered water security tools, such as digitally linked solar irrigation pumps and precision agriculture. The uptake of these brilliant approaches is capital intensive, making this a fantastic learning opportunity for sub-Saharan Africa from MENA. Beyond that, integrated service delivery. As I stated earlier, financial institutions may be led from the top, but they're driven by the center. So C-suite buy-in and support is critical, but institution-wide engagement will be the only mechanism to yield real results. On data analytics, this is one of my favorite topics within the space. In 2015, our portfolio had the privilege of running digital surveys of 23,000 smallholder farmer clients. Through investments in strengthening the presence of mobile phones, we were able to directly ask these clients questions on their productivity, on their yield, on their income, and my favorite question, the perceived risk in increasing their investments in their farms. So in response to the last question, 43.16% wrote back to us saying that a lack of financing was their limiting factor. Of course, I'm sure you can imagine our team, the focus on access to finance, we started jumping up and down, overjoyed that our program was on the right track. But then more responses kept coming in, and 43.64%, the margin higher than financing. Farmers began reporting that lack of liquidity and acumen at the SME agribusiness level, the cooperatives, the micro enterprises, and the small businesses that provide them with their seeds and inputs, that buy their raw produce and processed cocoa pods and coffee cherries and tomatoes, were not meeting their demand for supporting that for support, and that these agribusinesses were, until these agribusinesses were strengthened, they would continue to be unsure about how much time, effort, and money they should invest in their own farms. So from an institutional mission alignment and last mile farmer use case, it was clear to us that agribusiness, MSME financing, and TA was critical. And this was the launch of our agribusiness portfolio, which now supported over 15,000 small rural agribusinesses and represents 1/3 of our total portfolio by value. I'll speak to targeted portfolio guarantees later on, but portfolio risk management versus lowering thresholds for new client entry. What is your purpose in terms of risk sharing? Are you looking for an insurance product on your portfolio or enabling clients to enter into your book more easily? And this is a rapidly expanding area. There's a lot of hurdles with regards to increasing the flow of financing to agribusinesses across Africa. And two specific barriers to bridging supply and demand for agribusiness financing are, one, collateral requirements and accounting principles. And second, agribusiness profitability and return on investment. So in layman's terms, accessibility and affordability. So agri-SME businesses inherently have a very different cash flow profile and investment criteria than your typical SME. So due to seasonality, high working capital demands, and quick turnover needs, collateral representation to meet regulated financing needs is quite limited within the sector. This is further compounded by other internal process barriers within investment firms. most notably IFRS 9 accounting principles, which do not allow biological assets to be counted as collateral. However, through blended finance and patient capital investment in 2018, we've been able to see launch dedicated co-guarantee vehicles to buy down regulatory collateral requirements for qualifying firms. As we've piloted and scaled approaches like this, we've calculated that roughly a 6.4 to 9.8 times leverage has been made available in bridging finance to agribusinesses, depending, of course, on the value chain and the loan purpose. Pairing this with revolving working capital lines of credit, we've seen this approach to be significant in directly enabling SME finance to strengthening purchasing capabilities, supply chain functionality, and further unlocking capital for last mile farmers. Second to last on my list here is pay for performance. So a more and more common approach being used by developmental partners are pay for performance models, where an international government and bank partnership, for example, in Mozambique and here in Malawi, focused on expanding rural financing. In addition to an outlay of support for extension services and client outreach, the implementing team used a milestone-based pay for performance model in partnering with local financial institutions. As providers were capital constrained in both countries, the project was able to support in lowering cost portfolio funding mechanisms to move financing further down market in the key value chains. As financing milestones were achieved, financial service providers were reimbursed against the cost of capital, allowing rural financing portfolios to evolve and increase in lending operations. But here's my major word of caution. Financial institution incentives must be considered incredibly carefully in order to maintain the integrity of a portfolio. It's very easy to inadvertently incentivize poor lending quality and portfolio degradation. I can share case studies later on if you want more specificity on that. The final one on this page is concessional debt and blended finance, also known as blended finance. And what we said earlier about agribusiness profitability and return on investment, recent benchmarking assessments are noting that there's a 4 to 5% lower return in the sector. So clearly this represents a very significant opportunity cost challenge for credit committees and investment advisory boards. Why invest in an agribusiness when an urban investment will have a higher return? But ultimately, if clients aren't profitable, then our financial institutions will not be profitable and our portfolios will not be sustainable. So in order to bridge that gap and ensure the interventions are not just protecting the investor, but actually benefiting the client, it's a very exciting time in the sector where governments, private investment houses, and foundations see the potential here to address the affordability limitation of agrifinance. So on my second to last slide, I have 3 short practical applications. Hannes, if you can move to the next slide. The first is Valuetained Financing, and I know this term has come up a lot. So let me give a very specific example. In 2018, an East African Tier 2 bank projected coffee financing was estimated to get close to 10% of their total gross loan portfolio, which is the capped amount by their board and the regulator, unless they could implement a targeted funded vehicle to expand financing. So demand for average loan size for SME washing stations was roughly $118,000 across 25 different washing stations, with roughly a 65% exposure on the facility at any given point due to seasonality. The solution, a participation loan, subordinated syndication loan structure was proposed with the international trading company at the top of that value chain. The financial institution only buying 40% of these SMA loans. The trading company paid for the other 60% as the lead lender. So the net result was a doubling of the portfolio at a total of 15% annualized interest rates over a 9-month tenure, and individually assessed lines of credit for each agribusiness. Note that the FI's standard rate of direct financing was 21% annualized on a declining balance with bullet repayments. So we saw 6 basis points removed through this partnership. So in the new model, much better terms were offered to the washing stations who are directly on lending to their farmers to increase farmer loyalty come aggregation at the end of the season. Second, the role of the regulator. Taking an example from Uganda, where the Agricultural Credit Facility manages targeted concessional debt instruments. So the ACF was set up by the government of Uganda in partnership with commercial banks, the National Development Bank, micro-deposit taking institutions, and credit institutions is referred to as participating FIs. So the schemes started in 2009 with the aim of facilitating the provision of medium and long-term financing to projects and engaged in agriculture and agro-processing, focusing mainly on commercialization and value addition. Loans in the ACF are dispersed to farmers and agro-processors throughout the financial institutions that are participating at more favorable terms than are usually available under conventional loans. So the scheme administered by the central bank in Uganda, the BOU, and its operations are guided by an MOU across all stakeholders. The scheme operated on a refinancing basis, and once participating financial institutions dispersed all the loan amount required by the client, they then seek reimbursement from the central bank. So under this, a number of financial institutions were able to expand their agri-financing portfolios, and the key to success was the intervention was based on a number of factors, but most importantly by making midterm debt requirements more affordable for graduating clients. So under standard financing requirements, participating FIs would lend at 2 to 3% interest per month. And the business case for new farm asset ownership was weakened when extended over a 3-year tenure. So under central bank regulation, the ACF was able to reimburse local institutions interest costs after lending was confirmed. And the net result for the market was dramatic, seeing the capacity to make 3-year asset loans at 6 to 8% annualized, and saw a dramatic increase in client sales. Finally, a short case study from Mozambique on collateral easement. In Mozambique, utilization of a major government guarantee facility was first piloted as a collateral buy-down option. So in 2016, the Central Regulatory Bank of Mozambique, Banco de Mozambique, passed and highly enforced compliance with a new policy mandating lenders to only finance formally registered farmer groups. So as a result, many traditional group lending, co-guarantee agricultural groups were no longer eligible for finance from regulated institutions. So in collaboration with the Government Guarantee Facility Office, 2 financial institutions reconfigured the whole facility to act as a replacement for individual loan collateral requirements, allowing previously banked clients, primarily women and youth without access to land titles, the ability to graduate from group lending into the individual and emergent farmer segment, despite lowering the standard client collateral pledges. So on my last slide, if I may, I have a few final takeaways from this presentation. The first is one of my favorite quotes from William Gibson: "The future is already here, it's just unevenly distributed." So the best and most reliable innovations in agri-finance tend to actually be common financial practices that have just never been applied to that sector. So really the ability to localize, customize, and adapt will keep a product client-centric. Second, collaboration is multiplication, from John C. Maxwell. And we're shifting, into agri-finance. You have to move from a red ocean to a blue ocean strategy. So firms will only succeed if they practice collaboration and learning. And remember, of course, that a bank is not just led from the top, but also by the center. And agri-finance must collaborate interdepartmentally. Finally, a quote that I use with my team in my portfolio a lot is from Ben Hunt Davis, who asked the question, will it make the boat go faster, when his sailing team was struggling with finances? So the question we have to ask ourselves in rural economies, the marginal analysis is key to success, not critical mass. We'll focus relentlessly on unit economics. And digital solutions as a result are no longer nice to have, but a need to have requirement. But always remembering and retaining the sentiment and the ethos that financial services are still a relationship business at their core. We know that when farmers thrive, communities thrive. We also know that ending poverty will not be possible without solutions that equip and empower farmers and can support them in their faith in the future. But most importantly, I continue to be inspired by the strength that we see amongst the farmers and agribusinesses themselves as they continue to work every day to provide food for their families, their communities, and their countries. Thank you. So that's my prepared opening points. I believe we have time now for a short window on questions and answers.
Yes, thank you very much, Tim, for your presentation on how to, on what the finance industry can do to ensure we can double our agricultural productivity by 2050. Yes, I would propose, if you have questions, please post them in the chat, and then Tim will address them.
Yeah,
You'll
so
find
maybe,
the chat on.
So I think this is Chris from LFS. So I think maybe, as you said, there's just time for just a few questions. So maybe as others are typing, I got one for you, Tim. Okay, as a financial institution, what do you think some of the first activities to understand the market opportunity or the market size should be? So from your experience, noting that a lot of the participants here are from financial institutions in MENA region, what do you reckon some of those first activities are, just in terms of understanding that market size or market opportunity?
Yeah, certainly. So we've had the privilege as an organization to have 13 years of business risk reviews performed on our portfolios, and three main points come up. The first being production risk, the second being market risk, and the third most interesting one is your own internal operational risk. So most financiers immediately understand the production risk component. So will it rain? Will there be drought? Will it flood? Will there be pests and disease? And that appraisal is incredibly important. But beyond that, the market risk is one that more evolved financiers are looking at. And Chris, to your point in terms of market access, many financiers and credit committees will immediately go to requiring an offtake agreement and a contract as the proof point of that market capacity. However, particularly for less organized value chains, we've definitely found that scoping in terms of different off-takers to find 4 to 5 written letter of commitments of intent to purchase can be a more constructive way to gauge the capacity of that market. So as opposed to just a single off-taker, you can really look at the market capacity from that sense. Beyond that, gross margin analysis is critical at the farm level, because if the farmer is not profitable, the agribusiness won't be profitable. So can that agricultural value chain continue to deliver profits to those farmers after the cost of carrying interest? And so we say that's really one of the critical points, and that can be achieved easily through partnerships within the agricultural value chain. Thanks, Chris.
Okay, thanks. So yeah, I mean, I think to my understanding from your answer there, it's really about having those partnerships to show that there's that access to market at the end of it, and then that kind of feedback from there. And then we have a question from Sharaf, and he was asking, would you include fishery financing within the kind of the broader agri-financing, or do you see that there's some differences between the two? And then do you have any sort of experience around sort of the public-private partnership models? So two questions from Sharaf.
Good. I'm seeing them both now. So let's start with the second one on fisheries. I think it's also important to differentiate between fish rearing activities and open ocean fisheries and fish capture. In both cases, there are significant opportunities, particularly around the asset finance space. So we've been involved under our Agrifinance portfolio in West Africa with a significant open oceans fishery financing project, where one of the key pieces we're working on is reduction in post-catch loss. So financing solar-powered fridges and coolers for people who are at the end selling that fish. The goal of that portfolio is to expand into additional asset finance to support the actual capture process. But it's important to note that, and at the end of the day, fishery services can also be seasonally reduced. When it comes to fish farming itself, policy is really important here, where many countries will have trade discrepancies in terms of being able to bring in appropriate fish feed and floating fish feed to meet that. Of course, look at the specific fish that are being farmed, their feed to growth ratios to make sure that at the end of the day it is profitable. So short answer, yes, it's included within the category, and but just as with any other value chain, has its own specificity. Public-private partnership models are expanding aggressively, and pretty much every international donor at the space and government-led agency now has moved into a private sector engagement space. And it's interesting to watch many traditional public sector actors trying to learn how to engage for-profit financial institutions. And in many ways, I think one of the challenges that many public sector agencies just see banks as banks and fail to recognize the differences between financial institutions and have challenges in trying to fit a round peg into a square hole. So really, I think in terms of learning around those different models, it's key to make sure that a financier is able to express how they're distinct from others in the market to be able to make a more effective private-public partnership in the long term.
Great, many thanks, Tim. I think we'll move on with the next presentation. There will still be chances to ask more questions at the panel discussion. After the panel discussion, will remain available for some time. Yeah. Our next presenter will be David Nero. He works as the Chief Business Officer for Juhudi Kilimo. It's an institution in Kenya that is an innovative lender, and David will introduce us a bit into the products, the successes, the limitations, opportunities, challenges, and markets of Juhudi Kilimo in Kenya. David has more than 20 years of experience in microfinance. He is building and training teams. He's experienced in brand management, people management, business development, credit management, and he's now in charge of the business development and credit management of Juhudi. He has an MBA in strategic management. David, please move on. David?
Thank you, Matthias. Great to be here. Thank you very much. I wish to appreciate SANAD and everybody who made this webinar possible. We are really privileged to be in this forum to discuss agri-finance, because that's what we do at Juhudi Kilimo. First of all, Juhudi Kilimo is a microfinance institution that offers credit to basically rural smallholder farmers. And we have 80% of our portfolio in agriculture. And therefore, this is a good forum to hear what Juhudi does and to share our experience in this journey. So thank you. Maybe we can go to the next slide. We'll be looking at, with Juhudi, briefly, our products, our successes and limitations. We'll also be looking at the opportunities and challenges in financing agriculture. We'll be looking at the market applications, and we'll be looking at maybe what lessons can we take from here. Thank you. In Kenya, maybe just to share the background of our market. In Kenya, we have 80% of the population in rural areas, and 75% of them, they're involved in agriculture. And you find that despite agriculture making such a huge contribution to the economy in Kenya, the agriculture sector is faced by a myriad of problems. It actually produces 75% of the food produced in Kenya comes from rural smallholder farmers. And only about 25% comes from the large-scale farmers. And Juhudi Kilimo's focus on the market niche is basically it focuses on the rural smallholder farmers and a bit of micro entrepreneurs. And that sector of the rural smallholder farmers that forms 75% of the agricultural produce in Kenya is a big concern, because the challenges they face, there are many. And just to mention a few, we have the issues in Kenya also we are affected by climate change. We have very unpredictable weather conditions. Many a times the rains are coming late. We don't know when it will rain. Farmers plant. Even last year we had these challenges. Farmers plant and sometimes they lose the inputs, and they are not sure whether they will be able to harvest or not. Just like even the presenter was ahead of me said, most of the farmers, again, their productivity is extremely low. You find that they are producing less than 30% of their capacity, what they should be getting from their farm. They are getting less than 30%. This is contributed by many factors, and we'll be able to see that later. Most of the farmers, again in Kenya, 75%, they have under 5 acres. The land size in Kenya for the Adequacy is quite small, and therefore you find that most people may not be having that big chunk of land to do very big agriculture, or to invest in a big way in agriculture. So the farm size is a challenge. We also have most of the farmers, more than 2/3 of them, actually they have no access to formal financial and agronomic services. You find that most of the rural smallholder farmers don't have financial services because most of the mainstream commercial banks in Kenya find or regard, agriculture as a very risky financing sector. So most people don't want to put their money there. And therefore, access to agriculture becomes, access to finance in agriculture becomes a real challenge to majority of these people. The other thing also, these farmers, again, they want to do agriculture, but they have continued to do it in the traditional way. They don't have the modern way of doing farming. They don't look at farming as a business, so they still do subsistence farming. And therefore, you find that the farmers, their productivity is low. They're using very old technology, very old approaches to agriculture, and therefore, it's not even attractive to the youth. Majority of the people, the Airites, they shun it, and it's left to the rural people who sometimes also their level of investment is also very low. The next slide, please. Now, looking at the financial sector in Kenya, the financial sector is basically dominated by commercial banks, the microfinance banks. These are the deposit-taking microfinance institutions. Then we have the credit-only microfinance institutions, like now Juhudi Kilimo, as we are not a deposit-taking institution, we are a credit-only institution. Now we also have the fintechs. In Kenya, fintechs, they're there, and they really, they really have a huge market, especially at the bottom of the pyramid, giving small loans. And then also we have the SACCOs now. Some farmers are also organized in SACCOs, and they are able to access credit from their SACCOs where they contribute shares and borrow by guaranteeing each other. Now, the Central Bank of Kenya has basically regulated the commercial banks and the deposit-taking institutions. Now, the fintechs and the credit-only institutions are not regulated. But of course, at the moment, there is a push by Central Bank to try and regulate the fintechs and the credit-only institutions. But we are not yet there, but we hope, we are seeing this coming. The SACCOs are also regulated by SASLA, which is the SACCO Societies Regulatory Authority. Now, again, looking at the Kenyan environment, we have very high mobile penetration, mobile phone penetration, and even internet penetration in Kenya is quite good. So you realize that 80% of adults in Kenya own a phone. And then out of about 50 million Kenyans, 21.75 million, their phones, that is as at last year, as at January 2021. And we have 96% of Kenyan households, they have access to a phone, at least, and they have a mobile money wallet, or account, what we call M-Pesa in Kenya. So in almost every household, 96% of them, each family has an M-Pesa account. The next slide, please. So given that background in Kenya, because that background is very important to relate to what we do, because you realize that as far as we are concerned as an institution, we are not regulated at the moment, but we are competing also with regulated institutions in the same sector in agriculture, and also the micro enterprise, the MSMEs sector. We are also competing with the mainstream banks, with the regulated microfinance institutions, and therefore, as an institution, we have to define our niche. We have to define our market very, very well. Because Juhudi is actually is a social impact but for profit institution. It's an institution that seeks to improve the livelihoods of rural smallholder farmers and micro entrepreneurs. So for us, we saw that segment of rural smallholders being a market that is really neglected by the mainstream commercial banks. We realize that if we do it properly, it's a segment that can still be profitable with the proper approach. And I can put it here again that we have been profitable for the last 6 years consistently. We have always broken even. So our main products, we have the crop farming loans, whereby farmers now, those who wish to maybe get inputs for farming, they want a fertilizer, they want seeds, they're able to get a loan for that. We have agribusiness working capital, whereby maybe somebody wants to, somebody's doing farming and they need money maybe for repair, such things. So we give them a loan in that category. We have animal farming loans where somebody wants a cow. In Kenya, the dairy sector is that value chain is quite developed in Kenya. So you find that somebody wants to get an improved dairy cow, they're able to get a loan to that effect. We have farm equipment loans whereby somebody wants to get maybe a chaff cutter, some equipment for the farm. Somebody who wants to get a tractor, even or a motorbike, we are able to do that. We also have, because we realize also our customers also need some decent housing, because the rural areas, again, housing is still a need. Therefore, we have a micro housing loan, whereby customers maybe they are taking it as a business. They want to develop some units for rental income. Then also we in the micro enterprise, in the MSME sector, we also do the non-agribusiness working capital. If people have some small businesses, we are able to finance them. And apart from that, again, in our effort to really improve their livelihoods, we realized again, not every Kenyan in the rural setup is connected to the national grid, electricity grid. So therefore, again, we have come up with, because we also subscribe to SDGs in our social performance management, we have also offered our customers, clean energy products. We have partnered with manufacturers of solar systems or solar units or solar equipment. We have partnered with manufacturers of energy saving cooking stoves. And we just finance and the suppliers now, or the manufacturers, over these products to our clients. And then the clients can pay that over a period of time. Now, apart from these, again, our customers sometimes get emergencies, either their businesses or in their lives, in their life cycle. We realize that, again, they have other needs beyond agriculture. So we have the consumer loans. That if somebody gets an emergency, they can be able to get an emergency loan, at the click of their phone, and within no time they have the cash in their M-Pesa wallet or in their mobile phone wallet. Now, what makes us different? Because as an institution, again, as we offer these products, we realize that the traditional microfinance institutions were just providing, capital to the informal businesses, and that sometimes it was not very impactful. So as Juhudi, we try as much as possible from the products that we have to target, specific, solutions or specific assets for our clients that will be able to generate for them immediate income. And that way, again, we are assured of the loan repayment, and also we are assured of having an impact on the customers, agribusiness. So we don't just give cash for the sake of it. We look at, we evaluate whether the intervention that we are giving will be able to create immediate income for the client. The other thing also, as an institution, we have done, because agribusiness for sure, it's risky, and like we stated, again, the model is quite, if you have to serve the rural smallholder farmers, the model is quite expensive. So again, we have really a different to digitize our services for both the institution to realize some benefit from the efficiencies that come with the digitization, but at the same time, for the customers also to realize the benefits of the high penetration of the digitization in Kenya. For example, with the digitization, our customers previously used to get checks, and customers from the rural areas would travel long distances to go to the banks to deposit the check one day. Then they would get back home and then wait for about 2 or 3 days for the check to clear, and then so that the money would reflect to their account. And then after 3 days, they take a bus again and pay, fare to go again to the bank to withdraw the money. But now with the digitization, again, our systems are able to, to approve a loan. We're able to approve a loan for a client, and immediately the money gets to their M-Pesa account without a check, without the customer traveling to the bank. And they can pay using from that platform if they're making payments, or they can go to the nearest M-Pesa agent from their locality and be able to access cash. So digitization is both for the customers and the institution, and we're already realizing great benefits on this. So we have taken an approach whereby we have to really rely on digitization. Thank you. Maybe you can go to the next slide, please.
Just as we're moving to the next slide, David, just got about 5 minutes, just so we keep to the schedule.
Okay, thank you. Now, if you look at our portfolio, basically, we have about a $20 million portfolio at the moment, and 55% of that comes from crop farming. But as I said earlier, 80% of our portfolio is actually in agriculture. So the non-agri comes to about 20%. Then we also, as an institution, also just to look at overall sustainability, because as an institution, we have 3 key strategic pillars. We have sustainability, we have growth, and we have impact. To push on sustainability and to be able to reach out to more customers in the agriculture sector, we have 3 other products apart from agriculture. That is individual reading, salary checkoff, and now we have the digitization, where also we have the consumer loans, which come in form of the e-loan, where the customers can apply for the e-loan from their phones. So basically, that's how our products look like, and that's how the distribution of our products look like. The opportunities in Kenya, basically, we use the group model. Most of our customers, we meet them, they form groups of 10 members and above. And we use the Grameen model, whereby they are able to co-guarantee one another. We train them, and then they are able to access the loans. That's a big opportunity for us. Group still works for us very well. Then the agriculture sector is a big market that's quite untapped. And the government also really encourages people who are getting into agriculture, and you can be assured of the government support, or if not direct support, then they give you that leeway, they give you the space to operate. Then also internet in Kenya and mobile penetration is high. Therefore, reaching our customers using those platforms is very easy. Now, we have quite a number of challenges in this sector. One is that we have many players in Kenya in the financial sector, the fintechs, the unregulated microfinance institutions, the formal institutions like the deposit-taking microfinance institutions, the commercial banks. And therefore, customers, again, we have the challenge of customers getting multiple loans from these clients, and also customers getting over indebted. So sometimes it can be very difficult. Some customers will not tell you, they will not disclose, and when you finance them, you come to realize later these customers are over indebted. Then because, again, central bank disallowed, or it does not allow the unregulated financial institutions to risk customers with a credit reference bureau. So you have nowhere to get this information from about the customer's total indebtedness. The other thing is that as an institution, because of the cost model, sometimes you need to look for funds that are quite cheap or that are quite cost effective. You need to look at how do you meet your operational costs and expenses as you reach out to these rural clients, and at the same time, if you have borrowed the funds, how do you ensure that you have a sustainable business? Because we are not mobilizing deposits, therefore access to funds can be quite a challenge. Then the operational cost can also be quite high. Then again, customers' literacy levels, both financial and in terms of agronomic practices, they are quite low. Most governments stopped offering very effective extension services, so customers are not very supported by the government in farming or in how to do it, and therefore that becomes a challenge if you're investing in agriculture. You need to look at how to support your clients in agriculture. Then financial literacy, this is something also you have to really keep emphasis with your customers so that they learn the agri enterprises as businesses. Then climate change, like I said earlier, and the market for clients, those are quite challenges for our clients because sometimes they do the farming, they will do the potatoes, but when it comes to harvest time, because everybody done the same crop in that particular locality, the prices just go down. And therefore, even paying the loans become a challenge. Climate change, like I said, again, we are finding weather becoming very unpredictable, and customers are not having the facilities to do irrigation. So that's quite a challenge. The next slide, please.
I think, David, if we maybe just jump this conclusion slide and we'll go on to the recommendations just because of time.
Okay. Thank you. From my experience, you're saying it's good to look at the agricultural sector as an opportunity for many financial institutions. I think if you have succeeded, many can also succeed in there because the impact is great. And one thing we need to do, or we would recommend it in financial institutions willing to get into agri-finance to do, is we have to look at how do we develop our products so that they are well designed, they are customer-centric, and they are farmer-centric, if you allow me to say that, and they are competitive, because again, there'll be other players still in that sector who may offer almost similar products. Now, again, we need to battle with financing with training. Like I said earlier, most of our customers, they're quite disadvantaged when it comes to financial literacy and agronomic literacy. We also need to look at how do we mitigate risks in agriculture. Maybe we need to think of agri-techs, we need to think of insurance. Yeah, we need to see how do we mitigate the risks in there. And as a financial institution, this is something that you can't really ignore. We also need to look at what kind of innovations we can come up with in agri-finance. And the agri-techs need to be customer-centric. Again, they need to bring about efficiency for the institution, and at the same time give a solution or alleviate pain to the farmer. So I think we need also to focus on the pain points for the farmer and come up with solutions that work for both. It must be a win-win for the farmer. It must be a win-win for the institution. Again, we are saying the risks in there, they are manageable. Yeah, and it should not be charity work in agri-finance. The other thing also, agri-finance institutions can also work with governments, because governments can also, I've seen governments can also offer support to agri-finance institutions, either by supporting them from the farmer side, supporting them by giving them subsidies or or TAs, and I think, or even system putting in place, legislation that really supports the agri-finance to do their business. So I think we have a responsibility to help the governments that we work with. The last part is you can't do it alone. You need partnerships. You need to look for partners who share your vision, who play in the value chains, because in agriculture, the value chains are very important to know where you fit in. So I think you need to identify partnerships that can help you achieve your goal. If you're a financial institution, this sector has many players. There are many people who depend on the whole value chain that you want to finance. And therefore, it's important to look at who can help you, because you may not be able to do everything. So thank you so much, Chris and Tim. That would be it for me.
Okay, thank you very much, David. Again, just because of time, and obviously now we see the business model that Julie has. One question for you. Obviously, working in a competitive environment, have you found that other financial institutions have tried to either copy some of the innovations that you have? So maybe you can speak to something like that, because clearly, obviously, there's sometimes the first mover advantage, and it seems like on the business model that you have, it's quite innovative. But yeah, it'd be interesting to see from a market perspective, has there been any pushback, or has there been any copying or replication from competitors?
Yes, I would say we have found a lot of duplication. Of course, you innovate and others follow on. Yeah, we have seen institutions now again, but we have institutions that now have agriculture or agri-finance as a product in their portfolio. Even in the banking sector, we have a product on agriculture, but of course it's quite limited. We have seen again the issue of digitization. We have seen other microfinance institutions again trying to go paperless, the way Judy has gone paperless with the loan origination and approvals. People are copying for sure. It's you can't be an island. Yeah. Hope I answered you, Chris.
Yes, thanks. Passing over to Matthias for our last presenter. Thank you, David.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, David, from my side as well. Our next presenter is Bram Van Der Bosch. He's the CEO and co-founder of a digital agri-lender called Emata in Uganda. He has over 10 years of experience in finance and technology, and he had held various other roles prior to joining Emata, prior to co-founding Emata. He worked at UBS and ING Bank in investment banking and asset management in the Netherlands, Russia, and Switzerland. He also worked in the field of agriculture there. He was the managing director of a financial technology company called Loboremos in Uganda before that. Bram, I'm inviting you to hold your presentation.
Excellent. Thank you, Matthias. Can we start with the next slide, please? So introductions have just been said, so let's skip that. Today, I will briefly talk about the problem that we're solving, but it's largely similar to what has been said already. So I think we can keep that short. I will then also give a brief overview of our company and what we're doing exactly. And then we'll devote most of the time on sharing some of the things that we have learned and that we think could be useful for you here in the audience on your own journey to solve agricultural finance challenges across the world. Next slide, please. And one more. Excellent. So that is our mission statement here, right? We really want to use technology to its fullest by making sure we can reach millions of farmers across East Africa. And again, next slide, please, so we can go into a little bit more detail. Yep, and the next one. Excellent. So agriculture is incredibly important across the African continent. It contributes roughly 15 to up to 30% of all the economies in each African country. But as we all know, it is not getting the financing that it needs. In fact, it only gets a few percent of all the formal lending across economies in Africa, which creates a huge financing need. The sector studies vary, but they're all very big numbers, ranging from 100 to $240 billion. Now, I think I'm preaching to the converted, but still, right, there are a number of reasons why agricultural financing can be so challenging. The first one is that farmers often want small loans, given these are typically smallholder farmers with a small plot of land, and consequently, they only need a small loan, which may not be the most profitable thing to do for a financial institution. To make things even more difficult, farmers often don't have the collateral, or at least not the formal collateral, that banks or financial institutions like to see, right? Land titles, purchase receipts of tractors, all those things may not be as readily available as bank would like. Then thirdly, farmers often want the loans quite fast because, right, as David has just explained previously, a very big segment of agricultural financing is financing inputs, and obviously you need the inputs just in time, right, for the season. So there's some time pressure there that doesn't make things easy. And lastly, obviously, farmers tend to live in rural areas, whereas most financial institutions tend to be in cities. So all of these things combined make agricultural financing a tricky field. And if we go to the next slide, I can start explaining, and the next one, please, how we have solved this. So we have digitized the entire process and matched that with machine learning so that all these things, whether it's a small loan or it needs to be approved very fast, because it's all driven by technology, that can be made possible. Now, our model can be broken down into a few basic steps. Step one, we make sure that we get the data that we need on our farmers, and we have developed a piece of software for that we give to the partner organizations that we work with. Then step two, we use the data that we collect and we add to that weather data, satellite data, and the likes to generate credit limits for each farmer using alternative credit scoring, which again is powered by machine learning. And this way we can credit score a very, very big number of farmers in a very quick time. And then lastly, we also provide the loans to these farmers. We provide this digitally. Our systems actually approve these loans instantly. And we have opted to use WhatsApp as the way in which farmers actually ask for our loans. Next slide, please. So what does this mean for the farmers that we're working with our solution? It actually means a lot. First of all, we are much cheaper. We're actually priced fairly similarly, I would say, to other MFIs. But as some of you may be aware of, many MFIs actually struggle to actually reach these farmers. And most farmers today are using the informal money lenders, who are very, very expensive. So farmers actually find us quite expensive, quite affordable compared to what they used to. I think the other massive advantage that we offer is that, our loans are approved in minutes, whereas most MFIs take more like months. And again, that creates the risks of the loans reaching the farmer too late in time for the season. And lastly, we offer them a very pleasant experience, right? They don't have to travel very far to a bank branch to apply for a loan or to cash a check, as David has also alluded to. Our process is super simple. It takes 5 minutes, maybe 10 minutes where we can. We use local language, so things are very understandable. And we use incredibly simple prices. In fact, we don't have fees. We just have an interest rate, and that's it. Because we find it that farmers can find it quite tricky to actually understand the true price among all the percentages that banks or MFIs sometimes throw at them. Next slide, please, Matthias. So we're based in Uganda, and we're currently servicing 3 value chains, that is dairy, maize, and oilseeds, which happen to be roughly the largest value chains that we have in East Africa. And we expect it will be expanding to other East African countries starting next year. Excellent. Then this is the part that we actually wanted to present, and we like to talk you through some of the learnings that we went through on our journey on how to solve agricultural financing using technology. So The first rule is one that I always think is very positive, and I think should be giving the right vibes to the audience. That yes, right, in Africa and across the Middle East, telecom companies have had a tremendous ride and are become very, very important and popular. But they will not take over the banks. Telcos have done an incredible job in penetrating deeply into the country and in rural areas. They have many, many customers, but we think that they're not as innovative as they could be, or maybe even as they should be. In fact, telcos, in our experience, is that they are rather slow and bureaucratic, and that even some of their financial products that they have been developing are quite expensive. Speaking for East Africa, the loans that the telcos are giving are charged way above 5% per month, putting them on the rather expensive scale of the financial products out there. So yes, the telcos are a force to reckon with, but no, we don't believe that they will be replacing the MFIs and the banks. So agricultural financing still is something where MFIs and banks like yourself have a big role to play in solving this. So that's rule number one. If we move on to rule number two, yes. So people often say that data is the new oil, and that is definitely true. However, getting access to the right type of data can be incredibly challenging. At least speaking for East Africa, to find data that is validated, that is reliable, is very difficult. So we have learned ourselves that it's probably best to sort of go out there yourself as an institution and find a way how you can actually start collecting this data yourself. And this requires a high degree of creativity. But there are plenty of examples out there that you can take inspiration from. I would say the most famous one is Google, right? Google offers an amazing set of services, right? They have Google Maps, Gmail, of course, their search engine, and they all offer that quote unquote for free. But of course, they actually offer that in order to get access to data that they're very interested in. And I would say that many of us can take inspiration from that, because data will be key to solving this problem, but you probably have to go after that yourself because it's not really available yet. So that's rule number two. Think about your data acquisition strategy. If we move to rule number three, I've already dropped the word machine learning and data science, and these are huge buzzwords. And indeed, right, in the new data economy, they have a very big role to play. However, internally, we often say, sorry, this sounds a bit corny, but we say, scrape it until you make it. And with that, we mean that, yes, there is data out there and you need to use it, but there's rather a scenario of data scarcity than a data glut. And most of the machine learning algorithms, they work best, they work best when there's a lot of data out there, and then they will help you find the right patterns. Whereas we have learned that, yes, you should apply data science, but the trick is to get as much as you can out of the data that you have managed to acquire, as opposed to navigate away through tons and tons of data points, because data is unfortunately still rather scarce across Africa and the Middle East, I would say. So definitely use data science, but be careful by using the standard machine learning techniques, because often they have been developed for situations where there is a surplus of data as opposed to a scarcity of data. So that's rule number three. If we move on to rule number four, yes, everybody likes to talk about the app economy and that you need an app for everything. We actually launched an app way in the beginning when we just launched, and we quickly realized that is, at least in our view, not the best way to go. And that is for a number of reasons. First of all, people need to install an app, which means there's a hurdle. There's a hurdle in terms of actually installing it, but it also means people have to pay for data to download the app, which in rural areas can be considered an expensive hurdle to take. Secondly, an app means it needs connectivity to work very well. And there are other techniques out there, of course, that require less connectivity, right? USSD, SMS, etc. So yeah, think through the hype, whether an app is the right thing. Obviously, an app is a very meaningful way to engage with your users, but in rural Africa, I would say in particular, it may be a little bit early. We ourselves have opted for WhatsApp as opposed to an app, and that is because most people have installed WhatsApp. They already like using it. So it's a very easy way for people to tap into while still allowing for a richer experience than let's say USSD or SMS. But yeah, rule number 4 is think carefully whether your audience is ready for an app or whether there are other channels how you can reach them digitally. Moving on to rule number 5. Yes, design for your users, not for yourself. We have also again learned this the hard way. When we launched our first product at the beginning of our journey, we sort of used conventional design principles that we as a technology company thought were very standard, right? Android offers that, right? If you have a small looking glass icon, right? People tend to know that means that you can search for something. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case for our users. So we had to go leave the drawing board, leave the office, and go into the field and design with our users. This means bring your team into the field. This means start doing rapid prototyping, right? So don't develop a huge system, but just develop a small part and see if people like it, see if people get it, and iterating, right, as many times as necessary before you have something that makes a lot of sense for your users. There is no shortcut to this. So if you are an executive out there working for an MFI, yeah, make that investment and take your team out to your users and start engaging with them and start designing with them to solve it in a way that makes sense for them, not for you. So that's rule number 5, design with your users. Rule number 6. So the consultancy agency McKinsey wrote a very interesting article in The Economist last year on the future of Africa, including banking. And they made 2 very interesting statements. They said, 1, African banking sector is incredibly profitable. In fact, it's among the most profitable banks across the world. But 2, they also said, paradoxically almost, that they are the most inefficient. So looking at the cost to asset ratio, a ratio that banks often use to see how efficient they are, they were almost twice as expensive as most of the other banks. And I think that is mainly because of the heavy manual paper-leaning process that banks are using. Now, I wouldn't recommend that in general, but certainly not in rural areas. The logistics of getting paper in rural areas and back is a nightmare. So that alone should be reason not to do it. But also the fact that these farmer loans are often very small and you need to run a very high volume to make this a very interesting business for banks makes it very unsuitable for a manual process. So rule number 6 is stop manual processes as much as you can and move to automate, because that is a much better approach to solve the high volume, low value business that is agricultural financing. Rule number 7, I would say a very sensitive one for many banks when it comes to underwriting standards. So with this, I mean the documentations that banks require for farmers to show in order to be eligible. This means the collateral that banks require for farmers to have to be eligible for a loan. The fact of the matter is that most farmers don't have the documentations that banks want, that most farmers don't have the formal collateral that banks want. So to stick to those standards actually means that you're excluding a very big part of the banking population. On top of that, I would say that the decision-making process in banks with credit committee sitting is also maybe not the most suitable for making decisions when it comes to giving a farmer a loan, yes or no, and actually slows down the process to the point where, right, the speed of delivery becomes an issue. So I encourage MFIs and banks, just like ourselves, to really rethink, okay, right, we need to get comfortable as a bank, sure, but what is it that farmers can actually offer us that can make us, that can help us make the decision whether we are or whether we are not going to give them a loan, and not necessarily stick to what you're always asking to your more affluent and bigger clients in the urban centers. Because if you keep on sticking to your collateral requirements, you will be excluding, unfortunately, a very large section of the farmer market. So that's rule number 7, which brings us to the final rule number 8. Now, there's a reason why we started with the telcos and why we're now ending with the telcos, because again, the telcos have had a massive impact on Africa, and mobile money in particular is a game changer. And we have seen, especially during and after the pandemic, that mobile money has reached every village that we know, at least in East Africa. So mobile money, so telcos may not have the banking future, but with mobile money, they have invented the rails that will allow you as an MFI or as a bank to extend your reach to a point where you couldn't before, simply because of the cost of moving cash or the proximity to your clients didn't allow for that. And of course, David has already alluded to this, that whole dealing with checks and people coming to your bank branch to pick up their money or going to your bank branch to repay you was a huge hurdle, and that now mobile money allows you to skip. So mobile money, definitely, we recommend you to embrace it, but be careful. We have already seen the first cases with companies being hacked when it comes to mobile money. And these tend to be the aggregators, i.e. payment companies who sit in between, maybe you as an MFI and the telco ultimately. We recommend to integrate with telcos directly. That may take a while. As I mentioned, they're not the fastest, they're not the easiest to deal with, but from a security perspective, it is the safest way to do it. And yeah, the rails that mobile money has provided are incredibly useful to bring innovative financial products to rural Africa. It's time to start wrapping up. So if we go to the final slide, please. Can we go to the final slide, please?
That is the final slide, Bram. The summarizing.
Yes, excellent. Thank you. Now, if there's anything I like you to remember, it is these things. So I'm going to repeat them one more time. The agricultural finance opportunity is huge, and it's still there. You can still make a very interesting business case, we believe, as an MFI or as a bank. But in order to do this, there are a few things you need to do. First of all, automate. Get rid of as much paper as you can. Get rid of as much manual processes as you can. Because if you want to be successful in this market, you have to leverage the power of technology, which means automation, essentially. On top of that, think about data science. The way to crack this is through data, which means think through your data acquisition strategy, but also start building in-house capabilities to work with that data. You may not think you need it now, but trust me, in a couple of years, it will be indispensable. So please start on your own learning journey when it comes to data science. And lastly, rethink your underwriting standards. I know it's very, very tempting to keep on sticking to your principles and how you have been doing things. But our experience is that, yeah, if you want to serve the farmer segment successfully, you have to think through what the farmers can offer you, and not only what you want to see as a bank, because otherwise you will be excluding way too many farmers who actually can be served very profitably by your institution. All right, that's it. Chris, shall we move over to the questions?
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much, Bram. And yeah, please, as we wrap up with Bram, we'll have a short break just for 5 minutes before moving into the panel discussion. So please get your questions ready. But Bram, we had one question from Sharaf asking about the WhatsApp service and whether the business service and are there any sort of tricks or lessons specifically around the business service. And I have a question in regards, you mentioned that you're looking to go to either other value chains and or other markets. Has this included MENA region? And if so, or if not, what are the reasons behind that? So there's two questions to start with, and then we'll take a short break.
Excellent. Yeah, let's talk about WhatsApp first. Indeed, WhatsApp has recently been opened up by WhatsApp to allow any type of company really to integrate, but they quote unquote force you to go through an intermediary there, and they do charge fees. So indeed, you do have to pay to integrate directly with the APIs of WhatsApp, at least at the moment. You still need to. Is that very expensive? No, I would say no. Obviously, if you run a digital model, all right, the way to compare this is, right, okay, how many staff would I need, or what are the costs of a branch? And of course, compared to that, these costs are very insignificant. But even still, these cost levels are so low that they will not influence your interest rate, I would say, in any meaningful way. When it comes to the expansion plans, in particular MENA, a very good question. And to be very honest, it is not the top of our list yet. And that is mainly due to regional market characteristics. The crops that are very good in Uganda, unsurprisingly, also tend to do well in our neighboring countries because the climate and the circumstances are comparable. So for us, in terms of our credit scoring algorithms, the time we need to train them on fresh data, because these are fresh crops and fresh market circumstances, is much shorter if we do this regionally. Language similarities, cultural similarities also make a big difference by allowing us to be probably faster in East Africa than we would go to MENA. Having said all that, right, East Africa is well, it was the beginning of where humanity started, but it's not the end of the world. So I would like to think that once we have finished our expansion in East Africa, we will again look at the rest of the world. And I wouldn't be surprised, given how important agriculture is for the MENA region, that the MENA region could be next. So it's definitely on our list, but honestly, yeah, not on the top of our list, because we think it's just easier to expand closer to home first.
Okay, and maybe I think we just have time for one more to see from Pius. I think, and this is maybe a question which I also had myself as well, just to understand the business model, is how do you ensure your loans are secure and not defaulted, since you give out non-secured loans, no collateral?
Yeah, and I would rather answer this question in a different way. How much security does collateral really give you? Right, I used to work indeed for a large international bank, doing very big loans for farmers, and we always had a lot of collateral, right? We're always over collateralized, but I never used it. And in fact, when we had a default, rather than going to our lawyer, we first actually went to a PR agency and made sure that this was known in the newspapers, because we actually felt there was a better way to get our money back by putting some pressure on the individual than by enforcing the collateral. And why am I saying that? It is because, right, legal regimes often require you to follow a process that may take 1 or 2 years before you're legally allowed to seize your collateral, right, by going to the juridical system. Then secondly, where is the collateral, right? The farmer or the borrower in general, they tend to know before you that they're not going to make it on their lawn. And very often, I'm not saying that everybody does this, but very often the collateral has moved before you are aware that you want to seize it. And then I would say lastly, especially for us, given that we're quite active in the smallholder farmer segment, right? If the farmer can't make up for a loan, what are you going to do? Are you going to take his or her last cows? Are you going to take his or her last farming tools? Right? It starts bordering on the unethical. Yes, you have a legal claim to do it, but should you? So we think that collateral, especially for this segment, but actually in general, is a bit of a paper tiger that banks love to believe in, but in practice isn't always working. I'm not saying all, right, not never, right? If you do car financing or motorcycle financing, These are very proven ways to reduce the risk on the loan. But in the case of agricultural financing, I'm not a big believer. And I would rather encourage MFIs and banks to rethink what else they can do to make sure that farmers have a very good incentive to get repaid, because I think there are better tactics out there to get your money back and make sure that your default rates are good. And just to prove my point, up until now, our default rate is 0.2%. Yeah, let me just repeat that, 0.2%. And we don't take collateral. We just have thought it through differently. So we think it can be done.
Okay, well, and I think on that note, 0.2%, I think anybody's going to be happy with that. And so I think we'll have a short 10-minute break. So others have got WhatsApp messages to look at or emails to reply to. So I'll put a pause on the recording, and we'll be back at 10 minutes past the hour, and then we'll jump into the into the panel discussion, where as well as Tim, Bram, and David will also be joined by Mohammed, who works with IFAD in MENA as well. So, and again, please, if you do have some questions, please keep adding them onto the chat so that we have a wide variety. All right, thanks, and see you in well, about 8 minutes now.
So welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a good break and got some energy for the remaining part of the webinar, which is the panel discussion on opportunities and challenges in the agri-finance sector in MENA and Sub-Saharan Africa. The team of panelists will consist of the current speakers, and Mohammed Abdelgadir will join, as well as Chris Dayton. Well, Mohammed Abdelgadir is the country program manager for the Near East, North Africa and Europe division of the International Fund for Agriculture and Development, better known as IFAD. He's currently responsible for Bosnia and for Yemen, and his responsibilities include managing the project portfolios, promoting capacity building of rural people to participate in local and national policy, and advocating for programs that improve the access of poor rural people to natural resources. He's responsible for agricultural technologies, financial services, markets, employment opportunities, and enterprise development. Before joining that fund in 2005, he served for the FAO regional office. And we'll have Chris Dayton, who has already moderated the question and answering sessions. He's a colleague of mine working at LFS as the Digital Finance and Technology Manager. He has more than 14 years experience. He worked in Sub-Saharan Africa and MENA extensively, mostly as freelance consultant, but for the past, I think, 4 years for LFS. His experience in digital finance payment systems, mobile network operating institutions. He has worked for USAID Access Project in Jordan and has plenty of experience in the field of digital finance. Yeah, so let me hand over to Chris.
Okay, thank you, Matthias, and thanks again, Tim, Bram, and David for your presentations, and welcome Mohammed to the conversation. So I'd like to start off with my first question, or at least first discussion topic. And so, as we know, there's kind of like 3 pillars of financial inclusiveness, which are around sort of access, usage, and quality of the service and the products. So in regards agricultural finance, and which to date is well below the potential both in sub-Saharan Africa and MENA, and as we've been discussing, I'd like to ask the panelists what are the best practices and lessons learned from their experience around these areas. So I'd like Mohammed, as our new guest, to talk about this agricultural finance and your experiences within MENA region, and then for Bram to talk about access, David around usage, and Tim about quality. So maybe Mohammed, would you like to start, please?
Thank you very much, colleague, and thank you for the invitation. I'm sorry I'm using my iPhone because my internet was interrupted during the presentation. I missed some of it, but nevertheless, I enjoyed hearing most of the discussion. And frankly, I would like to emphasize three issues before going to the best practices. One is related to the perceived or discrimination against the sector as a whole, agriculture as a whole, in terms of allocation of budget, allocation of resources to eat. And you all know that in Maputo, in Mozambique, we most of the head of the state, they agreed to allocate 10% of their budget to agriculture, but none of them received 4%. And in our region, as well as in Africa, I think they are less than 3% of allocation. This is one. The second one is also the climate change, which is also it's not our favor. It's make the business very risky, and it's perceived like that, and it's really risky in that perspective. I think in the first presentation we said that also from resources available, only 3% of the demand for agriculture finance was met. That means and that's why some people resort to money traders and received a very huge costs of insurance. The third one is related also the discrimination.
Hi, Mohammed, you're there?